I will continue with my lecture in the chapter 8, Why Everyone Loved Moody's. In September 2000, Don and Branset, a sleepy, 160 years old business information company, spun off a sleepy subsidiary. The subsidiary was Moody's, the credit rating agency, which Don and Branset had owned since 1962 and which has just hit the century mark itself. Along with its two competitors, Standard & Poor's and Fitch Rating, be repaid on time and in full. It did so by using a series of letter grades known and ratings. Its highest investment grade rating, AAA, meant that the bond had the same risk of default as a treasury bond, almost none. Bonds rate AA to BBB minus were also investment grade, riskier than AAAs, but still safe enough for Windows and or pounds. Anything below BBB minus was a junk bond considered too risky to be bought by pension funds and other institutional investors that were legally bound to hold only safe investments. The business of writing bonds was a study as a thing could be. Everyone used the three rating agencies and everybody understood what those letter grades represent on the risk spectrum. In the prospectus it issued prior to becoming a public company, Moody's boasted that it rate 30 trillion of the world's debt across 100 countries. Study, however, is not the same as fast growing. Though it was immensely profitable, Moody's 1999 revenues of 5,064 millions will have barely dent the Fortune 2000, much less the Fortune 500. When its stock began trading, most investors yawned. Warren Buffett, who always liked to buy stocks overlooked, took a 15% stake in Moody's, but that was mainly because he liked the company's impregnable market position and its steady cash flow. As events would prove, though, Moody's was poised to start growing faster, a lot faster. In addition to corporate and government bonds, Moody's has begun rating structured financial products. Wall Street catcalled EUPEMIs for mortgage-backed securities of balance sheet vehicles, derivatives, and the like. S&P and Fitch were doing the same. Although Moody's had been reluctant to rate mortgage-backed securities when first approached by Lew Ranieri in the 1980s, that reluctance was long gone. By the time Moody's became a standalone company, its structured finance business was growing much faster than its traditional bond rating business. Structured financial products need more than just a rating, though. They need a high rating. The whole purpose of an asset-backed security was to take assets that could never merit a AAA rating on their own and transform them into products safe enough to be rated that highly. AAA securities could be bought by investors like money market funds and pension funds. They could be used by banks to reduce capital requirements. The combination of tranching with its cascading levels of risk that use the riskier tranches in the capital structure to protect the higher rate tranches, and the other credit enhancement techniques that fortified the AAAs made that possible. The rating agencies had always been stingy about bestowing AAA status on corporate debt. In 2007, for instance, only 6 companies had a AAA rating. Yet, when it came to tranches of mortgage-backed securities, the rating agencies hand out AAAs like candy. Literally tens of thousands of mortgage-backed tranches were rated AAA. In the early years, the securities performed well. That was true even of the relative small batch of asset-backed securities that used subprime mortgage. They had plenty of credit enhancement, and besides, housing prices were going up the way they were supposed to, which kept defaults to a minimum. But the rating agencies continued to slap their AAAs on subprime securities even as the underwriting deteriorated, and as the housing boom turned into a outright bubble waiting to burst. When it did burst, the rating agencies and the investors who had depended on them were caught flat-footed. There were many reasons why the rating agencies continued to grant AAAs long after they should have stopped an erosion of standards, a willful suspension of skepticism, a hunger for big fees and market share, and an inability to stand up to Wall Street. Not least, Moody's and the other and an ability to stand up to Wall Street. Not less, not less Moody's and the other rating agencies turned their backs on their own integrity. The history of the crisis, says a former Moody's executive, is how Moody's put its profits ahead of what was right. After an internal meeting held in the fall of 2007, as the financial crisis was gaining steam, a Moody's employee complained that he would like more candor about the company's errors, as he called them. They make use look either incompetent and credit analysis, or like we sold our soul to the devil for revenue, or a little bit of both. In that. John Moody, the founder of Moody's, was a muckraking journalist who in 1900 published something called Moody's Manual of Industrial and Miscellaneous Securities. This publication, which inventors took to immediately, formed the origins of Moody's. At first, it offered statistical information about stocks. Then Moody began adding analysis, ranking stocks with letter grades. Finally, he shifted his focus from stocks to bonds. This was his eureka moment. There has always been far less information available about bonds than stocks. Bonds don't trade on public exchange, and most of the information about them is held by the investment bankers and traders who are trying to sell them. Moody saw his manual as a means of leveling the playing field. As the circulation of his publication grew, others copied him. Henry Barnum Poor, who edited the American Railroad Journal, engaged his son to begin writing bonds in 1922 after a merger with Standard Statistics in 1941. The company became known as Standard and Poor's. The credit rating business didn't change much until the 1970s, when two things happened. First, the rating agencies, which by then include a smaller upstart, Fitch Ratings, opened the way they generate revenue, abandoning the subscriber model in favor of charging issuers directly. The switch made undeniable business sense, but ratings had become important enough that many inventors would buy and rate bound subscriptions were always going to be optional for the subscriber, but a rating had become mandatory for issuers. The the rating agency's new business model came with an obvious conflict. Know that they were being paid by bonds issuers. The rating agencies were potentially beholden to the same people whose bonds they were rating. For a long time, the potential conflict had kept Moody's and S&P from taking that step. In 1957, for instance, Moody's executive told the Christian Science Monitor, "We obviously cannot ask payment for rating a bond. To do so will attach a price to the process, and we could not escape the charge, which would undoubtedly come that our ratings are for sale." No, Moody's was insisting it could manage this conflict. The second change came in 1975 when the Securities and Exchange Commission began to use rating to determine how much capital broker dealers had to hold. The higher a bond's ratings, the less capital the broker dealer had to hold against it. This made ratings even more important, but it also began that question of whose ratings would count toward reducing capital. To prevent a proliferation of fly-by-night bond raters, the SEC declared that Moody's, S&P, and Fitch were nationally recognized statistical rating organizations, or NRSROs. By the time mortgage-backed securities arrived on the scene, ratings were integrated in the very fiber of the capital markets. Lenders bought rating tigers in bond agreements. Stipulation that a rating downgrade could cause a debt payment to accelerate or collateral to come due. The government had literally hundreds of rules based on ratings. One said that 95% of the bonds held by low-risk money market funds had to have an investment-grade rating. Another said that schools participating in government financial aid programs need to maintain a certain rating. State regulators use ratings to determine determine the the capital that issuers had to hold. The resulting wave of regulation is so thick that a thorough review will occupy hundreds, perhaps thousands of pages. Wrote Frank Partnoy, a professor at the University of San Diego School of Law and the long-time critic of the rating agencies. As well intentioned as many of these rules were, they overlooked two problems. The first is that the bond market was essentially outsourcing its risk management to the rating agencies. The universal acceptance of the rating result is almost no independent research by the fund managers who actually bought the bonds. They simply assume that if the rating agency had given a bond a double A or a triple A, it must be safe. Nor was this some dark secret, as the office of the Comptroller of the Currency put in it in 1997. Ratings are important because inventors generally accept rating in lieu of conducting a due diligence investigation of the underlying assets. Second, the rules imbued the rating agencies with an almost biblical authority. To borrow a phrase first used in 1968 by New York City's finance administrator Roy Gottman. But that authority wasn't remotely deserved. The agencies had charts and studies showing that their ratings were accurate a very high percentage of the time, but anyone who dug more deeply could find many instances when they got it wrong, usually when something unacceptable happened. The rating agencies has missed the near default of New York City, the bankruptcy of Orange County, and the Asian and Russian meltdowns. They failed to catch Penn Central in the 1970s as long-term capital management in the 1990s. They often downgrade companies just days before bankruptcy, too late to help investors. Nor was this anything new. One study showed that 78% of the municipal bonds rate AA or AAA in 1929 default during the Great Depression. To critics like Partnoy, the fact that rating carried the force of law explained a troubling paradox, even as proof piled up that the agencies made mistake after mistake, their power continued to grow. In retrospect, the surprise is not that the rating agencies will eventually be corrupt by their business model, but that it took so long to happen. For many years, whatever mistakes they made were the result of misguided analysis, not out and out craftiness. This was especially true of Moody's, which had a reputation among bond issuers as a hard ass, according to a former employee. The Moody's culture, introvert and nerdy, was more akin to academia than Wall Street. An analysts would answer their phones after many rings, if at all. Moody's analysts were on the fish toward the issuer, who paid their salaries a little like journalists. During the heyday of newspapers, when they could tap their nose and advertisers. Credit analysts at Moody's didn't worry about the revenue that might be lost if they refused to give an issuer the rating it sought. That was someone else's problem. In the early 1990s, Moody's actually refused to rate a 10 popular structured product on the grounds that a rating might lead inventors to expect more than they were likely to get. This last anecdote was recounted in a 1994 article in Treasury and Risk Management magazine entitled "Why Everyone Hates Moody's." After polling 99 corporate treasurers, the magazine concluded that ingrained in Moody's corporate culture is a conviction that too close a relationship with issuers is damaging to the integrity of the writing process. Moody's was actually proud of that characterization. A company executive responded by saying that the survey left out our most important constituency, inventors. What caused Moody's to change were three things. The first was the inexorable rise of structured finance and the concomitant rise of Moody's structured products business. The second was the 200 spin-off, which resulted in many Moody's executives getting stock options and gave them a new appreciation for generating revenues and profits. And the final factor was the promotion of a former lawyer named Brian Clarkson within structured finance. A Detroit native who had graduated from Ferris State University in Michigan and then practiced law at a Tony New York firm. Clarkson joined Moody's as an executive in 1991 without even having worked as a credit analyst. One of his early tasks was to rate mortgage-backed securities issued by Guardian, the supreme mortgage originator found by the Jedinacs in California. The bonds, needless to say, eventually blew up, but if there was a lesson in that, it was a loss on Clarkson and his bosses. By 1995, he had become too co-head of the asset-based finance group. Clarkson went off like a bomb inside Moody's. He developed a reputation for being nasty to those who couldn't fight back and for never forgetting a slight. At my level, any watercolor discussion of his management style include the words fear and intimidation. A former Moody's lawyer, Rich Michalek, later told the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Mark Frebella, another ex-Moody's lawyer, told investigators that the company's top executives recognized in Brime the character of someone who could do unforgettable things with ease, and they exploit this character to advance their agenda. That agenda was using structured finance to boost revenues, market share, and, above all, Moody's stock price. Clarkson had no problem with this agenda. We're in a service business. He once told the Wall Street Journal, I don't apologize for that, but what exactly did that mean for a company that wrote bonds? It wasn't just a case of answering the phones on the first ring. Under Clarkson, firm analysts say it also meant caring about whether the issuers, meaning the small group of investment banks who mattered, were happy with the rings they got.